Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Today I'll be giving a webinar on exploring and using terminologies with Interlex. Just a quick note to everyone that the webinar is being recorded. Just wanted to make everyone aware of that. As a brief introduction, this presentation is around Interlex. This is something we're developing as part of the SPARC Knowledge Management and Curation Core, and we are a group that is out of the Fair Data Informatics Laboratory at the University of California, San Diego. I will start the presentation by going over some motivation for Interlex, get into a couple use cases, and then walk everyone through using Interlex and navigating Interlex. So in terms of motivations, one of the things in dealing with terminologies is that, there are hundreds and hundreds of, ontologies that have been developed in the biomedical domain. So this is BioPortal, a resource out of Stanford, and it is cataloging 835 current ontologies that have been submitted to this system. And, when dealing with, this number of terminologies, if you're a researcher, it becomes very hard to, understand, which ontology I should use. So for example, you search for, some anatomical structure and you get back dozens of potential ontologies that you may use and, different terminologies. And so, compound that with the number of terms that you need to describe anatomy, any of the protocols that you're doing, the procedures, and this then suddenly sort of blows up into a big problem in terms of being able to navigate all that information. And so we designed Interlex to be a dynamic lexicon of biomedical terms, but try to structure it in a way that makes it easy to find, the concepts and terms, that may be used, for example, in multiple ontologies, but provide that way in a more intuitive way, so that it is geared more towards, someone who isn't an ontologist who might be looking for these terms. And then there are other functionalities that we sort of build into Interlex to integrate it with systems, for example, within SPARC or within other projects, to be able to tie the terms into current workflows for example, in SPARC, publishing data sets and the like. So in terms of sort of a brief overview of terminologies and vocabularies in SPARC, sort of give information on some use cases. The vocabularies used in SPARC are used in many different areas, from the definition and annotation of data sets, and this includes the rich metadata that's included within a SPARC data set, and also active annotation and work on data sets, for example, via segmentation tools developed by Micro Brightfield. Then there's sort of the generation and creation of graphical sort of circuitry models, and also the annotation of 3D scaffolds. So taking the original data, lifting that up into models and circuitry, and then providing that via services, via the SPARC knowledge graph. So being able to do queries against sort of this standardized metadata and the common terminology and vocabulary that sits behind that. Part of what we're doing in SPARC revolves around a term request pipeline. And so, one of the issues is that a lot of the ontology and terminologies are not rich in terms for the autonomous peripheral nervous system. And so, one of the activities, within SPARC, revolves around the SPARC Anatomy Working Group, where they're working to build out and enhance, the terminologies around the data that Spark is involved with. And so there is a formal pipeline where, terms are gathered, either via, use and annotation tools, through contributions to the SAWG directly, and then those need to be reviewed, and also updated and modified. They get approved and potentially rejected as well. But then, they can be placed back into Interlex so that the terms are available to the broader community, and then also added to more formal structures like the NIF ontology, and then potentially even contributed back to community ontologies, for example, Uberon, which deals with anatomical information. And the goals of these vocabulary efforts are really to have a consistent vocabulary and terminology that sits behind a lot of the resources within Spark. So to enable effective search, to enable effective display of the information via the portal, via the map-based tools. Also, to be able to integrate across data sets, so that the same representation of the anatomical structures, the cells, the organisms used are all common. And then utilization of the data, being able to utilize that data on the researcher end who downloads it, so they understand and are aware of what exactly the terms reference. And to do that, we need to create a machine readable lexicon and the associated ontologies for this. And this is where, we're, generating these fair vocabularies within Spark. And, we aren't starting from scratch, right? So one of the core tenets is that, we leverage community ontologies such as Uberon, to form the foundation, for, the terminologies that we use. But again, not all these terminologies are complete, and so they need to be augmented. And we need to be able to handle sort of the evolution of these terminologies in computational ways and ways that are timely for the investigator and researcher. So if you're doing an annotation, for example, through a micro bright field tool, and you need to define a new term that you need to use in your annotation, it doesn't work if you have to wait a number of months to get back, that ID from, from the community ontology that might handle that term. You need to be able to generate sort of information about that term very quickly, to make it work, within the workflows that you're using. And, the general strategy, is, as I've mentioned, is that, start building off these existing fair community ontologies. They have been developed over many years. They've also have many different relationships and annotations that have been developed, again, over those many years, sort of interrelating those concepts and also interrelating to potentially across other ontologies. And a lot of them are in use across biomedicine. So this provides the grounds for Spark to be able to integrate with other data being generated, for example, by HubMap and other large data efforts. We are augmenting that information, and we're doing that through many different ways, as I mentioned. So one is through contribution by Spark investigators. There's other methods, where we're looking at, extracting information on connectivity from the literature, for example, where we might need to bring in terms as well. And, the overall goal is to contribute, this knowledge back to the community, in, the most appropriate way, one of them being, contributing it back to the community ontologies. Now, I've mentioned terminologies and ontologies, and so there are different levels at which these terminologies can exist. And so There is sort of the Spark lexicon, which is sort of the first level. This is where, you've defined a term, given it an appropriate name or label, added potential synonyms, provided a human readable definition, and potentially a source for where that term came from. And so this is basically the basic listing of the term and sort of how it might sit in a set of other terms. So for example, if you provide the superclass or the parent of that term, what type of term is this? The next step is the Spark ontology, and that basically then adds the relationships from the terms in the lexicon to other terms in the ontology and the sort of broader set of ontologies that make up the Spark ontologies. And you can also define additional rules, for example, to define that a neuron, for example, that uses GABA as a neurotransmitter is part of a larger class of concepts such as a GABAergic neuron. And so this is sort of the different levels in terms of how one might represent the terms. And the other aspect is that everyone's heard about FAIR. FAIR also applies to terminologies. Make sure that they're findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And there are a number of things that we need to make sure that any terms that end up in the lexicon are both machine readable, that they have their own unique IDs, that they have relationships to these other ontologies, and through Interlex we're able to do the first step of that in terms of providing them as part of a lexicon, and then building them into the ontologies builds out richer relationships around these terms. So just a quick couple slide example that this is not just Spark communities. We're also involved in reproducible neuroimaging, and so as part of this center, they're looking at neuroimaging data from the scanner all the way through derived analyses. And as part of this workflow, they also need to basically annotate and add information about what specific terms or data elements used within that experiment are actually mapped onto a consistent set of terminology. And so there are a number of tools that they've developed to do that annotation, tying into the services provided through Interlex to provide these annotated documents. So this is something that is common across communities, and that's sort of where we've come in terms of developing Interlex for this. And again, they also have a very similar pipeline process. Most of the tools that they develop are through Python to annotate these tools. So just a little overview of another community and their needs for Interlex. Now, I mentioned that Interlex really is helping in developing the lexicon, building out some of the relationships, but it's also tied into the ontologies themselves. And so just wanted to give, again, a really brief overview in terms of how the whole ecosystems for terminologies and ontologies is brought together, where there is Interlex, where we can have contributions from curators, domain experts. Those terms from Interlex can then actually flow into the ontology, and also we can have, if new terms come in from some of the community ontologies, they can flow into Interlex as well. And so there's the machinery in terms of keeping these ontologies and terminologies in sync, potentially with their external sources that needs to be taken into consideration. And then also the, when incorporating terms into the ontology, the actual knowledge engineering in terms of making sure that the terms are appropriately linked in to the rest of the ontologies. And, so that is sort of the how these systems interact. There's also then additional sources that we publish these terms to. So for example, once the terms have flowed in through the ontology, there are additional endpoints that applications, researchers can access. For example, SciGraph is one of them that we use within Spark. Now, in terms of the overall set of Spark ontologies, I mean, that has grown out of the work that we've done in developing the ontologies from the Neuroscience Information Framework. And again, here what we're just highlighting briefly is that, in terms of some of these different ontology modules, such as disease, pulling information from disease ontology, molecules, there's KEBI and protein ontology, organisms, there's the NCBI taxonomy. So there are a number of these community ontologies where we're pulling in information into the terminologies as the as the base for that. And then there are other areas where within Spark and other projects we have also been sort of enhancing and expanding the terms, and those are the little ones sort of flagged with the NIF across all our related projects. And then the ontology itself is maintained in GitHub. So anyone that wants to get into the formal ontology that's built from the terminologies, one can do that and go to GitHub, and there's a set of documentation there, and you can also gain access to the formal ontologies. And as I mentioned, any developer and tool builders have the ability to access the terminologies in a number of different ways. One is through REST-like APIs available through the SciCrunch portal that we maintain, and then there's also a set of Python utilities that can be used to interact with the terminologies. Okay, so now what I'm going to get at is I'm going to start walking through Interlex and sort of guiding in terms of usage and what's available for you. So if one goes, for example, to the Interlex itself for the Spark Anatomical Working Group, you'll end up on a dashboard page. The option there is to search for terms. When you actually go and do a search, in this case, I've searched brainstem. It will give you, the listing, of terms that are found. One of the first options you'll see on the left is the ability to select what type of term you might want. And so there are different types of terms that we maintain. And so there is the basic term. So this is, a term that describes a concept. We have, a term that also describes a type of relationship or type of annotation. And I'll describe that a little bit later in the presentation. We also have terms that describe common data elements, and then we have terms that describe term sets, and I'll touch on term sets as well later in the presentation. There are also additional facets that you can utilize, and then if in your search for a term that doesn't show up on the main page, and you can't find that, you do have the ability then to add a new term and suggest a new term in Interlex via the button below. So if one actually clicks on brainstem and you get to the main term overview page, the primary core term information, so its label, its definition, the preferred identifier that we have selected. So as you notice on the bottom right, there's a listing of a number of different term identifiers from other ontologies and terminologies. And so, this is, for example, brainstem from Uberon, from the foundational model of anatomy, and from Bernlex. And so these are, different terminologies that have been developed that all have information on the brainstem. In the purpose of Interlex, we do choose within Interlex, we do choose sort of a preferred ID Again, all these represent the same concept, including the internal Interlex identifier. But in this case, for most anatomical nomenclature, we have been using Uberon as the primary ontology, and this is something that is more commonly used also across a number of the different large data projects within the Common Fund as well. So this makes it easier to choose which ID is suggested. There's also a set of tabs then for additional information, and I'll walk through those as well. And some additional information. So for example, the superclasses of the term itself, and then a set of synonyms for the term. And the last two things, quickly to get people oriented, that on most of these pages, there's also, if you want to export the term, there's a way to export, in the top right, and then there's sort of a panel of navigation options on the type where you can go back to your search results and also issue a new search, and also add new term functionality is here as well. So for example, if you find a term in the list that you think might be appropriate, you click into that term, and then after reading the full definition and looking at some of the other information, you decide that is not the same concept that you're working with, then you can go to add a new term. So let me go back. There's also the edit button right here on the top right or top left. So if you want to add a term or edit a term, you'll end up with a entry form that looks very similar on the left. On the right, when you're editing a term, it will show you previous versions. So you can see sort of what a prior version of the term had in case you need to reference that when making your edits. If you were adding a new term, this panel on the right becomes a consistency check. So it actually will search Interlex itself to see, if you're adding a term, it will try and find the same term or similar terms, and then you need to verify that this term is actually a novel term. One of the goals of Interlex is not to have 20 representations of brainstem, but to have a common term for brainstem that describes the concept that then also points to a number of different terminologies that might have information about that term. And so there are a number of things that one can fill out here. So from the label to the definition, which should be filled out. You can also provide synonyms and additional existing identifiers from other terminologies. To fill in these types of fields where you have individual items that can be added or removed, you just need to start typing in your text and hit return, and then it will get added into that field. So the next step is, if you've seen the basic information, you can start exploring the relationships and annotations. And so the difference between a relationship and annotation is that a relationship relates a Interlex term with other terms within Interlex. So this is a term-to-term connection, whereas the annotation is a free form, either text or numerical range, or it's sort of free form input added to a term. And so in terms of the relationships, once you click on that tab, you'll see a full list of various relationships. And then there's also the option to add a new relationship for this term. And there's also ability to edit relationships. So if one goes to add a relationship, you basically fill in the brainstem is actually already pre-chosen for you. And then you can basically in this box, you can start typing the name of the relationship that you would like to use. It will drop a list for you. Again, if that list is not available for you, you can add a new type of relationship, and I'll show that to you in just a second. And then you add below that, you add sort of the other term that is related to, so that brainstem is part of another anatomical structure, for example. The information on the right here is about the current term, so from which term you did the add relationship request. And so that just provides some additional information. And this opens up in a new tab. So if you need to add a new relationship type, you need to go to add new term up above. And what you will end up with once you log in, again, you need to be logged in to contribute terms, is an addition form where you need to select the right type of term that you're creating. So again, this is a drop-down list. You can select relationship, put in the label for the relationship and add a definition for that relationship. And you can add additional synonyms, or if this comes from another terminology, you can add those existing IDs. But basically, we add that information, and you can then generate a relationship that you can use in the add relationship. Same thing for annotations. It's a very, very similar view. You have the view of the annotation list down below. Here you can see, that, for example, that their, brainstem has a related synonym, or that it has what's called a dbxref. And so this is a link to another terminology or another data resource. And again, add annotation again is in the top right of that box. And here it's, very similar. You have the term, that you were currently on already pre-populated in terms of brainstem. We then go on to select, as in the previous example, you can start typing in the type of annotation that you're looking to make, and it will give you a drop-down list. And then you have the ability to do a free text annotation for the value and add that. Again, if one needs to create your own type of annotation, you basically do the add term again in the type. Here you select annotation. And again, you fill out your label. You say what type of value type are you looking for. Most of these are textual, and you can provide then a description of the definition. Now the next panel gets to how terminologies and how the terms are used within sort of various data resources, databases, data systems, and this is the reference by panel. And so one of the things that we do with terms as we process terms through our discovery and indexing pipelines, we will actually start cataloging and allowing the mapping of what's found in a data resource to a formal terminology. And so this is what's provided in the reference by tag. And so this is, for example, in the Spark preview in terms of the data sets that we are indexing within Spark, that a certain anatomical, that this brainstem was found in the data sets, and it was found in the anatomy field. And so this allows the curators to go in and say, yes, that brainstem was appropriately found in this data source, and they can actually sign off on that mapping. And the last tab deals with history. And so this is about the evolution of the term within Interlex. And so here you can see, for example, that it's currently on its 9th version. And then you can look at any of the prior 8 versions. This has, again, information on the preferred IDs, the superclass, the definition. So you can go back and you can sort of inspect, what the difference is there. And so that sort of covers the general operating, within Interlex. What we can do is I'll cover now some of the advanced features in a little brief section. And one of them is tracking term activity. So one of the things within Interlex that we allow is that, for example, if you're part of the SAWG community, or for example, the NIDM community around neuroimaging that I mentioned before, is that as terms are created within those communities, we're able then to provide a dashboard, that allows you to, track, the generation, of terms, within in that community, and also look in terms of their versions. And so on the left, you have, for example, a set of facets for different communities that have been generating these types of terms. And this is an example of terminology from the SAWG in terms of terms that have been submitted, that are being also reviewed by the anatomy working group. I mentioned the term mappings. So this is another area where we provide the ability to go in and curate this information and really manage the mappings from terms to data sets. And so just as an example, this is an overview of the pipeline. There's within Spark, there's metadata extraction that we do, and information from external data sources that comes into what we call Foundry, which is our system for taking metadata, converting it into a standardized format, and also doing some additional enhancements to that. So for example, with proper information about terms used in data sets, we can do specific semantic enhancements on top of that. And so this system interacts with Interlex, and Interlex has a mapping API that is provided. And so this is something that other communities can use as well. So you can submit a mapping. That gets then that checks the system to see if there already is a mapping for that term within within Interlex itself. If there is a mapping, a matching mapping within that specific data source, that can be returned. If not, it can actually contribute a mapping to the database as a preliminary mapping that then can be reviewed by the curator. And then this information, once this is processed, ends up in a searchable metadata index. And so, just giving a quick example of semantic enhancement, so basically, there are a number of things that we want to be able to do. One is to ensure that, that appropriate identifiers are utilized in the metadata. So this is sort of the common preferred identifiers. And we also, in the source, want to be able to provide associated provenance so that we maintain the original and mapped information, so that we have, original information, what it's been mapped to. But once we have the semantic information about the specific term being used, then we can use the rest of the relationships in the terminology and the ontology to, for example, expand the amount, the type of metadata that one might want to search. And so, for example, here with rat, we can then expand it so that that also enables searches across rodent as well. And for this, for these term mappings, we also have a dashboard that's available. And then within that dashboard, there is the curatorial interface, which allows the curator to basically, update the status. They can, if the term match is not appropriate, they can look at other terms, that they may want to appropriately map to if the original automated map term was not appropriate. And then there's a curation history, of that term. So basically, In this case, the Foundry enhancer picked up the mapping, it submitted it, someone went in and then curated that information and said that it was approved. And the last item that I want to touch upon is term sets. So term sets provide the ability to create customized sets and collections of terms, sort of based on potentially the unique needs of a community, or the needs for use within a specific tool or application. And these term sets can be easily created. So again, before I explained, how you create the annotations, and relationship, the annotation terms that describe a type of annotation, or the relationship term that just describes a type of relationship. You can also create a new term set that way in the same add interface. And once you have, the term sets, you can actually build them up, and I'll get to that in the next set of slides. But you search for term sets the same way you search for terms related to concepts. If you want to limit your search to term sets, you can actually use these selection of types that I pointed out at the very beginning, and just select term set, and that will return the set of term sets related to your search. If one goes into a term set page, one of the things that you will see that is new is that you will get an additional collection tab right next to general. And this collection tab has then the full list of terms and term sets that are included within the term set you have selected. So for example, here you can see that midbrain is another term set that has been defined. And so that's included within brainstem, and then within midbrain, there are a number of anatomical structures that have been added to this term set. When one looks at the term set, they are built using a number of very simple relationships. So there's include term set and include term. And so here you can see that the brainstem term set includes the term set medulla oblongata. And what you want to do when you're developing your term set, this is exactly the way that we defined relationships before, is that you add a new relationship to your term set. You then select the relationship type, either includes term set or includes term, and then you select the term or term set that you would like to be a part of your term set that you have created. So that's sort of the overview of Interlex, and giving you a little insight into how the terminologies and ontologies that are being developed. Interlex being one of the tools that has helped developing those within SPARC. And how they are used in SPARC and some other communities. So we have time for any questions. And if you have any questions also, I think you should be able to unmute yourself. And then there's also the ability to type in the chat if you have any questions that way.
Oh, hi, Jeff. I typed one into the chat. When I'm using Interlex, I can't find the term set filter in the side. I only see CDEs and term and annotation.
On the filter, the types?
Yeah.
You should be able to, because I took.
Oh, I'm looking at it right now. I did a search. And I see term, relationship, annotation.
If there are no term, yeah. So if there are no term sets for that term,
but there should be. It's a BICCN term.
Yeah, hold on. Let me.
You can, Marianne, you can test with the term stomach, and that should return a set of results which includes term sets.
But didn't you create a term set for the BICCN terminology?
There is, but it may not have it in the label.
Can people still see my screen?
So if I wanted to find out a list of all the term sets, okay, so there it shows up. But if I wanted to find out a list of all the term sets that you have in Interlex.
Yeah, so you can do a blank search. So basically just return a star search. So basically return everything and then unselect term, select term. You can still see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay, so you can unselect term, select term set, and then hit submit. And then that will return all the term sets that are
Okay.
available.
And
then you can also,
my other question is with the versions,
Mhm.
I didn't see that each version was separately referenceable by a URI.
the versions are, I mean, that isn't built in currently. I mean, we could do that as something.
I think you would want that because if I'm using a URI and the term has changed, it's changed a parent or something, and I don't agree with what was done, I may want to use an earlier version.
Yeah, this is one of those things that we have in the roadmap, and we do have ways for referencing the sort of the versions of the ontologies that are equivalent to terms that can also be extended. Actually, we also have an endpoint that lets you see every version of every term as well.
So again, one thing that you'll notice, just for those who are looking, if you're using Interlex, there's also a contact help desk button on the bottom right, and that will send email to our customer request tracking database, and then we'll get back in touch with you to help you, with whatever you're trying to do. Okay.
Thanks.